Okay. I think it's in the New Old.
It's all old.
Okay. As he was setting out on a journey, a man ran up to him and knelt before him and asked him, "Good teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone. You know the commandments: do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honor your father and mother." And he said to him, "Teacher, I have kept all these things from my youth on up." Looking at him, Jesus felt a love for him and said to him, "One thing you lack. Go and sell all you possess and give to the poor, and you will have a treasure in heaven, and then come and follow me." But at these words he was saddened, and he went away grieving, for he was one who owned much property. I'd always thought of that story, and I'd always thought of salvation, right? Because the rich young ruler is seeking true salvation after the living God. He knows who Jesus is. He knows he's kept the commandments, and he wants to know what he can do to have eternal life. So I've even taught the kids this as a salvation story. But I really think as you go through, hopefully, what I'm going to talk about in my testimony, I think it's an everyday story, and I don't think it just has to deal with salvation. So let's point out a few things real quick. So the man came seeking eternal life. He sought Jesus out, right? So you can think about your life. We don't seek out God, right? He seeks us out. And I think that's one of the first similarities, right? And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. The man appeared to keep the letter of the law, right? So he said, "I kept all the 10 commandments." That's important because you should keep the 10 commandments, but we know it's the motivation and the reasoning behind that, and we know that Jesus gave us a new commandment to love one another. And if you love one another, you would certainly be willing to help those that are poor and not go away grieved as the rich young ruler did. Despite him keeping the law, Jesus felt a love for him. This is the first time that really stood out to me. So you imagine Jesus is interacting with this guy, and he's saying, "But I'm a Christian." Right? I'm going to paraphrase a little bit to talk about my story. "But God, I'm a Christian. I keep all your rules." Right? And it says that, and I never caught that, it said Jesus had a love for him. Jesus loved that guy so much that he was going to say, "Okay, I'll set you free from those rules," right? That's fine. I'll give you something else that will give you a hope, that will give you a joy, that will give you a peace that you've never known. But it's going to hurt when you have to go through this. And that's something I never really saw. Jesus loved him, so he was going to cause him some pain. He was going to cause him heartache. He was going to cause him to really question what his faith was about and hopefully overcome it. Now, we know from the story, obviously he didn't, because the man was grieved. Jesus obviously knew that this was going to be the interaction. He goes on to teach more on this about rich people entering the kingdom of heaven and the pitfalls of money and things like that. But I'm not going to touch on those. I'm going to move to my story. So keep that story in mind of the rich young ruler, of being a Christian, as we all are. And then God says, "I demand more of you. Sell all your possessions." And maybe it's not your possessions. Maybe it's your anger. Maybe it's your rage. Maybe it's lust, adultery. I don't know what it is. But we all have something that we go through in our lives that we struggle with. And those things change throughout time. Case in point, on August 4th, I went into the doctor to see why I was coughing and unable to breathe at night. I got a little piece of paper that said, I don't know, pastor knows all the medical terms, but it said it was probably a bacterial infection in my lungs, but there's a chance that it was cancer. I was at the doctor by myself because I thought, oh, they're just going to go shoot me up. I'm going to be good, go back home, see my wife. I took the day off. We can have a family day. So you go to the hospital, get some tests, get some other stuff, meet some doctors. Bear with me a little bit if I get emotional. I remember sitting in the room. I don't think we had called my parents yet. I think I might have texted my mom that I had to go have some tests, but I didn't know what anything was. And a doctor came in. He was not a very good doctor as far as bedside manner would go. Pastor had the privilege of meeting him as well. But at this point, it was me and my wife there, and my kids. And he asked the kids to leave. What do? Do you send your 5 and 3-year-old out in the hall in the middle of a hospital? No, your wife has to go. And he proceeded to talk. And I remember where I was kind of in a fog when he was talking. Like, I didn't really understand what he was saying, because you're by yourself, you're scared. And at the end, when he got done, I'm like, so is it the other thing, the bacterial infection? And he laughed at me, which I thought was very, not bedside mannerly like. It's not what you want when you're there by yourself, and you're getting that news. Ha ha ha, no way, it is cancer. So that's how I found out I had cancer. So, me, I'm kind of stubborn, thanks, Dad. And the first thing I said was, how do we beat it? Those were the first words out of my mouth to that man. And he looked at me and kind of put his head down. He's like, it's lung cancer. I said, okay. How do we beat it? It's very far along. Okay. How do we beat it? And he kind of looked at me and said, we'll have to wait, but it doesn't look good. Turned around and left. Wife comes in, kids come in. Hardest day probably of my life to have to tell her what it was. Luckily, Pastor was there the next morning, and the doctor came back, and we, I think, asked some questions. And then my other doctor, I have so many doctors now. One of the other doctors came in. He was a young guy. His name's Dr. Valino. He does his residency for my family doctor. And he's like, man, I'm just really sorry. I can't believe this. Were you exposed to anything that would give you lung cancer, blah, 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 blah. No, not really. And then Pastor was there. He was a huge help. He basically, we fired a doctor, I think. We said we didn't want that doctor anymore. Because in my heart, I felt like with that guy, there was no hope. And I know as a Christian, you always have to have hope. I might die. I don't know. We'll get through that and talk more about that at the end and where God has me. But I'm not going to not fight. I got 2 kids. I got a wife. I got youth group. I have you guys. I'm not going to lay down and just check it in. So we got a new pulmonologist. And literally, Dr. Valino walked out in the hall, took his cell phone, called the other doctor, sent my files over. And just to keep this light so I don't cry the whole time, one of the tests he ordered for me was a pregnancy test, which you would kind of think is so they have my blood, they order a pregnancy test. So, why do I have to get a pregnancy test? I don't think I have female reproductive organs, but maybe I've been living a lie, right, in today's day and age. So I remember we got the results. I'm positive. So, but what they use it for is to check for a reproductive cell cancer, testicular cancer primarily, but also through that test and the other test that doctor ordered, we found out it wasn't lung cancer. And the fact that there was a huge tumor sitting in front of my chest, which the pulmonologist failed to mention to us. He said it was just in the lungs. This is actually, or at the time, was the biggest tumor that I had. So you go through, you're going to die because it doesn't look good, to, hey, it's this other type of cancer. Oh, by the way, and this sounds bad to say it, but if you're a 33-year-old man and you get a cancer, this is probably the one you want to get because we can treat it and it's curable. In most cases, it's curable and it goes into remission and it doesn't come back. So you're kind of like, dead? Really good. Dead? Really? And it's a swing of emotions that happen really quick. And on the outside, I was processing that very well, right? I remember Pastor came over, I think it was when I first got out of the hospital. We had a little bonfire with Jake and the boys, and he was a huge help just talking to me, and we're hanging out. It was normal. It was nice. Some of the breathing treatments and stuff they were giving me were helping me breathe. It was still almost impossible to breathe at night. About a week later, they took another round of tests and said, hey, you have to start chemo right away. If you don't, your lungs will shut down, because it was everywhere on my lungs. And start chemo, and you don't know what to expect. I have a cousin, Heather has a cousin in Arizona that had chemo, but hers was like an hour a day. And talked to some folks that had it and know it's probably going to suck, but you don't know how bad it's going to suck because it affects each person differently. So round one at the hospital was great. I got to eat a lot of food. I had a roommate for the first 3 days that had the exact same cancer that I had. So I got to minister to him. He wasn't a Christian, and Heather and I talked to him and his girlfriend, and don't know where they're at, but we got to be a light to them while we're going through the same thing, which was, just an awesome opportunity. Came home, had to go to the hospital twice, right? You came and saw me both times. It was a rough road, and then you start getting sick, and you start throwing up, and you can't eat anything, and you just don't have an appetite, and you're tired, and then they have this thing called chemo fog where your brain is like functioning but not functioning. You start to forget things. You start to feel like you're in a cloud, and it's kind of a crummy way to go through your life, but it's a necessary thing that you have to go through, right, to try to beat this. And on the outside I was doing good. I was playing shop a little bit, I think, to be honest with you, and he knows that, and I think my dad knows that. But God started to really break me down. I'll cry, I'm sorry, but I'd sit at home on my couch and I'd look at the wall. It's just pictures of my kids. I was very scared of what would happen to them if I wasn't here. Scared of who would raise them. Teach them to be men. I would teach them to love God, treat women correctly, play sports, whatever it is. Thought about my wife a lot. What would she do? How could she take care of the house? How could she pay bills? I just wasn't in a good place, and I hid it. I'd cry throughout the day. My wife would come home, "Oh, I'm good." People would come over, "I'm good." I wasn't. I was depressed a lot. I've never dealt with anxiety or depression, but I was depressed for a lot of time. But it was good because God showed me something, and I remember, just being so down. Before I went in for my second round, I went in, I kissed my kids, and in my head, the depression, the things you struggle with, I was thinking that could be the last time. And it killed me, and I cried that whole night after my wife went to sleep because I didn't want her to know. And I was holding on to my family like they were mine. And here where I'm going with this through all my terrible sobbing, my nose running. They always tell you, I remember Dave and Debbie told us, and Pastor and Liz used to tell us in married couples, you reach a point where you have to let your kids go, right? Like, you raise them, you teach them. They're not yours, they're God's. He's got them in his hand, and I never really had that epiphany as a parent. I'd said all the right things. Oh, they're God's kids. Yeah, I raised them. But you never have to depend on that you might not be there. That God's got your wife here, and he's got your kids here, and he's not going to let them fall apart because I'm not there. That was a really, really difficult, probably 42 days of revelation to get to that point where I thought, and I remember telling Pastor AJ this, I thought I trusted God, and I did. I kept the 10 Commandments, right? The rich young ruler, to try to bring it back. I teach kids. That's my passion. I love this church and the people of this church with all my heart. I love those kids with all my heart. Try to be a man of character. But Jesus said, sell all your possessions. Except he didn't tell me to sell all my possessions. He told me to look inside and see what I was holding on to that I shouldn't hold on to. Now, does that mean as a man you're supposed to protect your wife and protect your kids? But you have to understand they're not yours, right? And this is my specific situation. It could be your job, right? Maybe you have anxiety about losing your job. That's not your decision. That's God's decision. Maybe it's hatred or anger or something. We're all going to go through something different, thank you, throughout our lives, and not just one thing, right? When I'm done with this, there's something else down the road. It's not just going to be, well, you know what, Travis, you went through cancer. Really great job, easy street for you for the rest of your life because you did a good thing. No, there's going to be other things that suck and other things that challenge me as a man, and there's things that will challenge us as a man. And I remember just coming to that peace in my heart, and hopefully this is hitting home with you guys. If I die, it's okay. I don't want to. I really don't want to. But I think having that original diagnosis, it just always stuck with me in my head. And then par for the course, Pastor Marcuse came over for his routine visit, and we were talking, I think, a little bit in the living room, and you wanted a drink, so we went out to the island, and you just looked at me funny, and I kind of knew you were going to ask something that was going to be like an epiphany or something that, I'd have to think about. And you asked me if I thought I was going to die. You said, do you think you're going to die? And it kind of like, this is literally right after the night before I had come to this realization that it's okay if I do. It's how you live your life while you're here. And for the first time, I looked at you and I said, I thought I was, but I don't think so now. But God had something that he wanted to show me that was huge. I would not be able to love my wife and my kids the way that I can today if I was still holding on to me controlling everything that happened to them and happened to me. I had to let that go. I had to sell my possessions, quote unquote, like the rich young ruler did. And our whole lives will be asked again and again and again to sell our possessions, no matter what it is. And as men, how you enter into that, it's difficult, it's challenging, but that displays your character. That displays godliness. That displays his holy purpose in our lives and how we can be a light to other people. And so you asked me that. I answered. We had some dialogue. And for the first time, it was almost like God was speaking to me when you asked me that. It was, hey, idiot, 42 days you've been struggling with this. Do you really mean it? And I meant that when I said in my heart, I thought I was. It's the first time I told anyone that I honestly thought I was going to die through those first 42 days. I thought I'd get to the end of this. It beat me. I didn't stop fighting, but inside in that depression, I was really stuck in there. And I realized why I was stuck in there, because I was holding on to things that, I love, I hold dear, but they're not mine to hold on to. Like, those possessions are God's. And if he tells me they got to be without me, they'll be fine. It'll work its way out. And that's, as a father and a husband, that's hard to come to that realization, but it's freeing. And that can be with anything. Like I said, that could be with your job. I know a lot of people in our situation at work that struggle with losing their job. I mean, that can paralyze you. That can cripple you, and you're focused so much on that, you're taken away from who God was. At the table I shared, I've been able to pray and meet people that have cancer or they're just struggling. My prayer life, my study life is much better after the 42 days that I went through, because I realize now just how freeing that can be. And my hope, and I said this at the dinner without going through all this detail, I don't want anyone ever to get cancer. I mean, going through the treatments is absolutely it's terrible. You hate it. You have to do it, but it's probably the worst thing I've ever gone through in my entire life. But the fruit that it's produced, right? The ability to really, face mortality, face, what's holding you back from God is it's freeing. And that's why, God, I'm blessed that he gave me strength to be here today, to be here last Sunday. And I hope if you guys don't hear anything, when you read that story, maybe you go home and read it tonight, maybe you read it 20 years down the road, I don't know. But think about that. Jesus will look at you with love, always. And he's going to ask something of us. God is going to continue to ask something of us. It's the process of sanctification. It's a process of becoming more like Christ. And that something usually always sucks from our worldly standards and usually always is viewed as a setback. But if you enter it with the proper heart, which I did not do, if you enter it with a proper heart and proper commitment and strength and relying on your faith, it can truly change your life, and I think change the lives of those people that are around you. So I'm done.